This is an interview between Mr. Louis Drago and Mrs. Patricia Hall of the Excelsior branch of the San Francisco Public Library. Mr. Drago is the son of Italian immigrant parents. He is a native of the Excelsior district and has lived here for 70 years. He is now a salesman of can labels. The interview is taking place on June 29, 1970. The article referred to next is The Last Farmer by Tom Carter on pages 26 to 30 of the California Living magazine in the June 21, 1970 edition of the San Francisco Examiner and Chronicle.
A week ago Sunday in the Examiner, in that California Living, I think it's called, that special section about these farms.
Yeah, I saw that.
Did you read that? That's exactly right.
Yeah, that was a
Because he
different...
made no mention of them being in this area
No,
below
it was a
Mission,
different-
between Mission Street and San Jose Avenue. But they were. Now, but I looked again, and it said in 1920. Now, prior to 1920, Mission Terrace did away with vegetable gardens when they built Mission Terrace. We got out, and eventually it became a housing district, you see. And many others the same way, little by little, you see. So he perhaps was right. He said there was some 74, I think, vegetable gardens in San Francisco, not Daly City. Of course, there are plenty of them going on there. And at that time, for years, in Colma Hills was just loaded. There was no such thing as homes there. But anyhow, he was right. The article is very good.
Yeah, it was good.
And he spoke about the long hours, and the $1 a day is correct. That's what we used to pay him. Board and lodging, $1 a day. And naturally, it's that perhaps was fairly comparable. I know that a neighbor of mine worked for $1.50 a day for the Market 3 Railway, working in the railroad tracks, and he raised a family on it, and he had to support himself. You see what I mean? There was no such thing as board and lodging. So the $1 a day perhaps was, I don't know, may have been all right at the time.
Before we talk about the Excelsior District as it is today, we'd like to get a little bit of your background and how you came to be living here. So could you tell us where your parents came from?
Well, my father came from a city or town north of Genoa named Calvari. My mother came east of Genoa, a city called Chiavari, and it is spelled Chiarvari. Naturally, in the conditions in Italy at that time, being peasants, which they were, both my mother and father, they came to America to help themselves in progressing. And there was no opportunity there because every family depended on a small plot of ground for an existence. Therefore, that is the reason why my folks came here to America. My father came here in about 1975.
1875.
1875, pardon me, 1875. My mother came in 1885. They met here. My father was already farming in a vegetable garden in San Francisco, and they married. My sisters and I were all born in the vegetable garden. And from there we carried on, and I am still living in the district. I've never moved away from the Excelsior district.
Did your family own the land?
No, we did not. We rented the land from the Burnell family, which is a familiar name to everyone here in San Francisco because of Burnell Cut and Burnell Heights. They were large landowners, a Spanish family that had owned a lot of land in San Francisco.
Could you tell us what you grew?
We farmed an acreage of approximately 10 acres. It was situated between Alamany Boulevard and just below Cayuga Avenue, and from Silver Avenue to just between Santa Rosa Avenue and Ocean Avenue. We grew a variety of vegetables and seasonings. All vegetable gardens did the same. They all grew diversified, considerable. There was no such thing as big production of 3 or 4 crops as it is today in these large farms. The plots were small, rectangular as a rule, approximately 100 by 100 feet, and it was a beautiful sight to see all of the different vegetables growing side by side in plots. It was picturesque as well as interesting, and visitors would come out from the city and would admire the view of all these vegetable gardens, and there were many of them because they ranged in size from 2 or 3 acres to perhaps 20 or 25 acres in size.
What were the vegetables and the spices that you grew? What kinds?
All varieties of vegetables.
Do you have bell peppers or artichokes?
Not bell peppers, artichokes,
Eggplant?
and not eggplants. They require a warmer climate. But all cabbage varieties, radishes, lettuce, onions, parsley, carrots, all the common varieties of vegetables. And the seasonings were from parsley, chives, rosemary, thyme, sage, etc. And of course, all of this was sold locally. That is, in San Francisco. We had 2 wagons that brought the vegetables in the early morning. They would leave about 2 o'clock in the morning. One of them would service large fruit and vegetable stores. Fillmore Street was a very large shopping area. The Foxhall Market is one that I recall very well. We had a regular route for that particular truck to make deliveries. The other truck went to the produce wholesale market. But all the farmers, all the ranchers, these vegetable farms, all delivered their vegetables locally to San Francisco markets.
You said you recalled the San Francisco earthquake and fire, is that right?
Yes, I do remember that very well. That early April morning in 1906, when I was awakened, and my family and I were very much concerned and worried. I looked out. I was looking towards the window, and that window was actually appearing to me as having 8 corners instead of 4 because of the rocking that was taking place. And of course, that evening, it was really awe-inspiring to see, and rather, it was a serious situation, but it was a beautiful sight to see that red sky overlooking Twin Peaks in that direction. The city was burning, and the sky was as red as though you painted it. The next morning, the ground throughout the Excelsior District was littered with charred paper, ashes of the vacuum on the force of the fire would sent the ashes high into the sky, and the winds carried it across the mountains into the Excelsior District. Then we had, a few days later, it was a tent city. The city had provided tents for those who were burnt out in the city, and moved them out here in these empty lots that we had in the district. And they provided them with a small stove, it was rather more or less a camp stove, such as you would find in a camp like in Yosemite Valley, in Camp 16, or where you feed it wood and you have a couple of lids, and you cook your meal that way. And that's what they did. After a few weeks, they disappeared. The refugee shacks were built by the city, and they were housed again. These refugee shacks later on were sold. People purchased them, moved them, and remodeled them. I know of one in the Excelsior District right now, that's up on Moscow Street, that was a refugee shack.
Okay.
Yes, and remodeled, enlarged, and of course that's the aftermath of a Holocaust that we had, and it was quite a disaster. And I might mention this also. There's a restaurant on 17th Street near Arkansas. That restaurant, the owner tells me, it's known as Salvati Restaurant, S-A-L-V-A-T-T-I. The owner tells me that his father purchased the wood from the temporary buildings that the city had built to house valuable city property. And after a year or two, when they rebuilt, the buildings were demolished and the lumber sold. They were dismantled and lumber sold. And his building was built by the wood that was purchased from the city when these buildings were demolished or disassembled.
It's talking about life as it was in the district as you were growing up. Was there any tension between northern and southern Italians?
Hardly. I don't recall any real tension. Naturally, people colonize a lot, and people from the northern part of Italy, for instance, those from Piedmont like to get together and are friendly and talk about the old country, and they naturally get friendly and associate. And the people that come from the vicinity of Genoa, they did likewise, and those who came from southern Italy likewise. But, however, they all seem to be friendly enough. I don't recall any tension.
Was there any discrimination against Italians by other Americans?
No. The population was principally Irish and Italian, and they all got along very well. In fact, most of my friends were really of Irish extraction, and they all kidded one another and joked, but they were all friendly, very friendly.
Did your family drink wine?
Yes, we did. We were in the vegetable garden. It was necessary for us to provide the men with wine, and we made perhaps 1,500 or 2,000 gallons of wine per year. And as far as drinking wine is concerned, we had wine for perhaps lunch, but at dinner time we had tea. As long as I can remember, we served tea to the workmen, and also we drank it ourselves. And once occasionally, some of the workmen might add a little wine to the tea. If you ever want to try it, it's not bad. I've tried it. But anyhow, it was tea.
Did you get the grapes from elsewhere, or did you grow the grapes around here?
No, the grapes came in from grape growing regions, Healdsburg and many other regions. They came in the fall, and practically all Italian families in the district purchased a certain number of amount of grapes to make 200 or 300, enough to make 200 or 300 gallons, or perhaps a little more, wine for their own consumption. We did it as a case of necessity because these men were used to drinking wine and required it and felt as though they required it. We wouldn't be, I don't believe they would stay if we didn't have wine for them to drink.
Right. As you were growing up in this neighborhood, did you want to identify with the Italians or with the whole group, more or less as Americans?
No, as I grew up, I associated with many nationalities. Many of my friends were of Irish extraction, and I had several friends that were of German extraction. We were very friendly, and of course, I had friends that were French descent, and actually, we mixed. We really mixed as we did in school, because in school you had it's the democratic way of life, and of course, we were very democratic about it, and we mixed very well.
What were the occupations of people then, besides farmers?
Well, principally laborers. In those days, that was before the advancement of technological advances, and of course, there was a lot of pick and shovel work done in those days, and there were a lot of laborers living in the district, and teamsters, and of course, there were always those who were bookkeepers and stenographers, and of course, I have a cousin that lived close by here, and he was an iron molder, so he was a tradesman. They were tradesmen, but they were all hard-working people, and not necessarily businessmen, but hard-working people.
The occupations today are more varied. Is that
Much more varied because of these technological advances and sciences. The field is huge now, and of course, the type of employment today, it offers the employment. These advances have offered a great deal of employment, a varied employment. So therefore, they are in many. Actually, they can practically choose their vocation today by applying themselves. Right.
Talking about physical changes in the neighborhood, in the transportation, you said there was once an Alamany Railroad.
Yes, the Ocean Shore Railway operated between 10th and Bryant. That was the terminal, and it came through San Francisco by crisscrossing across San Francisco in some way. I forgot exactly the direction, but it finally found itself in Alamany Boulevard. It was then Alamany Avenue at that time. And of course, it was not paved. It was a dirt road. And the Ocean Shore Railway Company built tracks, and the train went clear down to Pescadero. And it hauled particularly fertilizer to the farmers, because all along it skirted the coast clear down to Pescadero, and of course, it was all farming all the way. The passenger trains didn't do so. They didn't have too many passengers. I used to watch these trains living in the vegetable garden, and the train would pass right by practically our door, gate, and they suffered for the lack of passengers. But occasionally, groups and lodges held picnics, for instance, down at Morse Beach and Muscle Rock and places of that sort, and of course then they would fill the cars, but that is not a daily operation. In the daily operation, the passengers were not too many riding the train. Of course, there was since it was running along the coast, at that time people didn't have any reason to travel. They were farmers, and that's it really. However, in 1922, there was a streetcar strike in San Francisco, and the streetcar did not operate. So the Ocean Shore Railway offered to haul the people into San Francisco. And they climbed aboard all the way, I guess, from Daly City or beyond, clear down through San Francisco, clear down Alemany Boulevard, and made many stops to pick up passengers, and the cars were reloaded. And I recall, because I rode it also to work, and the windows were covered with wire mesh to prevent window breakage in case of rocks being thrown. But the railroad eventually had to fold up. There was not enough business to keep it alive.
And about when did the jitney service start?
That's when the jitneys started at about 1920. During this railroad streetcar strike, it was long about 1922, and the word jitney is the fare was 5 cents, and a nickel in those days was also known as a jitney. And I had a neighbor that he was his business was to deliver papers for the Bulletin. And in the afternoon, when he got through delivering the papers, he would put up his signs and run jitney. And of course, that was a nickel. And that's about the time the jitneys got started. It was during the streetcar strike. They flourished.
Yeah.
They're in operation today and in a bigger way.
Right. You said that a lot of the street names in this area have changed.
Yes,
starting with Excelsior Avenue.
Right. Excelsior Avenue was known as China Avenue. Santa Rosa Avenue was known as Croke Street, C-R-O-K-E. San Juan Avenue was known as Bauer Street, B-A-U-E-R. I don't recall any other street names being changed, haven't been changed.
Do you remember about when they started changing, or did they all change at different times?
No, I think Excelsior Avenue was changed from China Avenue first, and later I think that Bauer Street and Santa Rosa Avenue and Croke Street were changed about the same time to San Juan Avenue and Santa Rosa Avenue.
You said that the Jewish Home for the Aged was a dairy at one time.
It was. It was located, it occupied the exact area that the Jewish Home now occupies. And the owner's name was Aftergut, A-F-F-T-E-R-G-U-T. And he had quite a dairy there, and I always recall the large barn, the big sign he had that was whitewashed on the side of the barn. Fresh milch cows, and I never could understand the word milch, M-I-L-C-H. I thought it was misspelt or something, or I didn't know the meaning of it. However, I later on found out it meant milk. Being a German word, it meant milk, and of course it was used a great deal by farmers, I suppose, and dairymen at that time. We had a lot of small dairies in the area of Russia Avenue and Persia Avenue up there. We might say up the hill. There were a few dairies up there that delivered milk to the residents. We also had a sort of a horse farm run by Abe Mills. It was located at Russia Avenue and Mission Street. He sold horses, and horses were a necessity in those days. People used them and needed them, and of course that was his business. So in the connection with that, we had two horseshoeing shops in San Francisco. One was located near Norton Street on Mission Street, run by Mr. Scheid, S-C-H-E-I-D. And the other one was located near between Tingley and Teresa Street. His name was Jose Leiras. He was Spaniard. I worked for Mr. Leiras as a sort of an apprentice horseshoer. And I did pull off a lot of shoes, straighten the nails, and pull them off with the tools that are known as horseshoers tools. And delivered horses, picked them up, painted the hoofs. And I never did mind that smell of the burning hoofs. I thought it was had a pretty good fragrance. It was never obnoxious to me.
It was to many people, though?
I imagine it would not be too pleasant. Many people would object to it. But I found it pleasant, a pleasant odor.
Could you tell us about some of the old buildings that are still standing in this district?
Yes. I'm sure that the Mazzara building, located at Silver Avenue and Mission Street, is an old building built before the turn of the century. However, it was remodeled, and it's quite a flourishing operation now with businesses located there, and of course immediately across the street from your library is Marshall Sheet Metal Works. That is an ancient building. I'm sure it was built before the turn of the century. Likewise, the building occupied by Bruno's upholstering shop, and that shoe renewing shop that's alongside of it there, they've been built before the turn of the century, I'm sure. Now we have them right along Mission Street. We have stores like where Benny's Delicatessen is now. That is an ancient building, and many more that are here and there along Mission Street. The Tiscornia building is located at France and Mission Street. It's a very tall building. It's 4 stories, and that's an old building. Mr. Tiscornia farmed immediately across Mission Street from that building. The area now occupied by Safeway stores, their supermarket, Valenti Marini Mortuary, and Priola Auto Sales, and many other buildings that are now located there. That was an empty area. That was a farming area, a vegetable garden that was farmed by Mr. Tiscornia. There's a big house, and I call it the big house because a lot of the teenagers have given it that nomenclature. It's a tremendous size house, a building, at the corner of Onondaga and Mission. That is a very old building. There's a lot of apartments in that building, or flats, and coming along down Mission Street, there are many small buildings that are very old, including the well-known Central Drug Building and the Excelsior Bakery. That was formerly known as Seitz Bakery. The Seitz family were making pies and cakes there when I was a tot. And many stores that are adjoining that Excelsior Bakery. The Hayes Park Laundry was in existence when we were farming. And I'm sure that it was built before the turn of the century or thereabouts. And it's still operating today at the same location. It is on Alamany Boulevard, just beyond Ocean Avenue, between Ocean Avenue and Onondaga Avenue. Many of the residences between Silver Avenue and Onondaga Avenue, and between Mission Street and Moscow, are really old homes that have been remodeled, and they present a fairly nice appearance and are livable. And of course, you can do a lot of things with an old building if you remodel and spend the money on it. And of course, they are here and there, and those that are not remodeled are very noticeable, and in fact seem naturally objectionable to the residents, adjoining residents. Mr. Cheragino was in the windmill business and artesian well digging business. He would drill wells for farmers, for those who required their own water. Mr. Cheragino was located immediately across the street from the library, and I must mention this, that in the early days when Excelsior Avenue was unpaved, the rainfall, the water coming from McLaren Park running down the street, Excelsior Avenue would erode the street, and the result would result in a quite a culvert. And the children had a difficult job getting across that culvert to get to school, and Mr. Cheragino would carry them across this ditch or culvert so that they could get to school. Incidentally, speaking about windmills, all the vegetable gardens used windmills. That was their only means of pumping water. And we had two in our small 10-acre vegetable garden, and the two were required because of much water is needed for growing vegetables. And all the vegetable gardens had windmills. It was quite a picturesque sight, very picturesque, and of course it was quite a requirement. Later on, of course, when the advancement of the electrical age, why the windmills were dismantled and electrical pumps were installed in their place. And these pumps would fill these tanks with water, and the water would be drawn from the tanks. So it is a little bit, when I think about these things, they come to mind. Sometimes you forget these, and then you recall some of these tools that were used in those days.
What were the nationalities of people who lived here around the turn of the century, and what is it like now in comparison?
At the turn of the century, along that, for many years, the population was principally Irish and Italian. That is, descent and immigrants from Ireland and Italy and their children. There were others of other European countries, the descents from other countries in Europe, German, French, and thus and so, but they were principally Irish and Italian.
And now, how is it?
Oh, today, why, the population is more cosmopolitan. We have quite a few people living in the district from Latin America, from the Philippines, and some colored people living in the district.
This district is known as a wealthy district, one of the wealthiest districts in the city. And what do you think accounts for that?
Well, I would attribute that to the hard-working people that struggled years ago, laboring and working long hours, and they came home and they were willing to save their money, and there were not many ways of spending money in those days. And of course, there were bars, we know that, but they saved their money because actually it was hard to come by. Wages were not too big, and the income was required to pay for a home, and I would say that that's the reason why they saved their money, and why the district is, might say, pretty solid with people that own their own homes and have been doing well for themselves, invested their money perhaps, and have done well for themselves.
What did people do for recreation?
Well, uh, people did not have the automobiles, no radio, no TVs. And they, if they belonged to a lodge, they were very happy to attend meetings. And there were quite a few lodges in the district. And of course, the big thing was visiting. They would visit on Sunday, and very often, some of them would visit 4 or 5 friends or 4 or 5 different families. And that was a source of enjoyment and recreation. We did have some church affairs, bazaars, and occasionally a dramatic show where the parishioners would that had talent would be in the show, and we did have a few what we call shindigs. A shindig was a dime a dance proposition where the single men went to these dances, and the girls were provided by the shindig owner, and they were generally girls from the district and respectable girls, and the gentlemen would pay for each dance. So recreation, as far it was, there was little choice. You visited friends, and of course there were a lot of house parties. That was a means of recreation. House parties. You could hear a house party going every Saturday night here or there, music playing in basements, and they would have their weddings and christenings and all that sort of. They would be held in basements.
Rather than in the church?
Well, the receptions.
Oh, I see.
Receptions. But they did the best they could. Today, of course, you're able to travel around in an automobile and get to many places. And of course, the economy can provide a lot more money now for going out, dining out, and going to resorts, shows, and of course that was not so in those days.
This is a short postscript to the interview. The address of the remodeled shack on Moscow is roughly on the east side of the street between Avalon and Excelsior, next to an empty lot. The shindigs he spoke about were held in the rear of bars. One he remembers was at Amazon and Mission called the Eagle's Nest. There was another which was run by someone called Dago Mary, and there was a third on London Street.